Recently, a subscriber from several states away reached out to me and asked me to inspect and test drive a 2011 C6 Corvette Grand Sport with 58,000 miles. After we had a chance to talk about it, I agreed, and then he quickly set up a time with the salesperson at the dealership for me to visit. I showed up right on time at 9 a.m. in the morning, and there it was, prominently displayed in the corner of the dealership's lot. It looked great from a distance, but as I would soon find out, there were a few concerns.
Toys for life.
I went inside to find the associate that the buyer had been speaking with, and she quickly assigned me to another individual who came outside with me to show me the vehicle. I made sure that they both understood that I was not the buyer. I was simply there to give the vehicle a comprehensive inspection and test drive, and then relay my findings to the buyer. Once outside, the first thing I did was to open up the hood and physically touch the block to make sure the engine was cold, and then it was started, and I left it running the entire time I inspected the rest of the car. The engine sounded great and was super quiet from the moment it was started for the entire time, which was probably around 35-40 minutes that I inspected the car, and it was fully warmed up. My job is to document the existing condition of the car and identify anything that I see, hear, or feel that is wrong with the car that a prudent buyer would want to know in order to make an informed decision. So I started the inspection of the exterior, and the first thing that I noticed up close is that the car was kind of dirty and it hadn't been detailed in a while, which is pretty unusual because just about every time I've made an appointment with the dealership to look at a specific vehicle, when I arrived it had been freshly washed and detailed, so the car was looking as new as possible. So despite the fact that the car was a little bit dirty, upon closer inspection I was able to determine that the exterior and the paint in general were in very good condition, but then my eyes were drawn to the front rotors. One of the features of the C6 Grand Sport is that it has the same beautiful and massive brakes that the C6 Z06 has, and unfortunately this car has been sitting outside for quite some time, and furthermore somebody had put rotors on the front that do not have painted rotor hats, and the rusted rotor hats stick out like a sore thumb behind the beautiful C6 rims. On a positive note, on those beautiful rims is a set of almost new Michelin PS4 tires, which are great tires and they're expensive, so the fact that they're almost new is a good thing. The only other exterior items that I noticed was a crack in the passenger side headlight assembly that would need to be replaced, minor scratches in the gas cap lid which could likely be buffed out, and some fading in the molding around the front tires, which I think could be addressed with a little detailing. Now, let's go inside. I'm definitely a fan of C6 Corvette interiors. They're simple, they're functional, and I found this one to be in extremely good condition, including the all-important driver's seat. The only issue I found with the interior was a broken center console latch, which shouldn't cost too much to replace. As mentioned earlier, I started the engine almost immediately as part of this process. It's fully warmed up, and since we're inside, I found that the gauges all work as they should, and I cycled through all of the parameters in the instrument cluster and found no issues. This was also a good time for me to hop out of the car, and I asked the associate to open the convertible top and close it so that I could make sure that everything operates as it should, and it did. Next, I gave the engine bay a comprehensive looking over, and I found another issue: the battery. It's obviously been leaking, and leaking is especially bad in C5 and C6 Corvettes because the engine computer is down low and behind the battery, so if enough battery acid leaks over time, it can drip onto the engine's computer and main wiring harness, and this has the potential to cause serious problems. Also within the engine bay, I noticed it has an aftermarket K&N cold air intake, which is considered a respectable modification by most, unless the buyer is looking for a 100% stock engine bay. While we're talking about modifications, I also noticed while I was at the rear of the car that it does have an aftermarket Corsa axle-back exhaust system, which is considered by many to be the best available option. Next, we went for the test drive, and the engine sounded as it should and felt powerful. The transmission went through all of the gears and shifted firmly, the air conditioning worked, and the brakes stopped the car as they should. Everything went well with the test drive with the exception of the active handling traction control system. When I activated the button, I found that it was very lazy and slow to respond to trigger the various driving modes, and while I was able to get it into all of the various modes, it was a little concerning that it seemed lazy and a bit inconsistent in response to pressing the button. I also noticed during one of the multiple times that I started and shut off the engine that I had to hit the button multiple times to get it to respond and shut the engine off, which is unusual. I'm not sure if it's because of a weak battery in the fob or what the situation, but this issue, as well as the lazy active handling traction control concern, is definitely noted in the report to make sure the potential buyer is aware. I went ahead and performed a full system scan with my trusty AutoFix D1 Lite scan tool, which, by the way, in my humble opinion, is the best scan tool available for the money. If you're interested in looking into this further, I'll include a link in the description below. Anyway, I was curious to see if I would find any electronic brake control module codes, or EBCM for short, particularly because I was having kind of that lazy active handling traction control button, and there were no codes in the EBCM. In fact, all of the codes that were present were historical codes having to do with low battery voltage or communications, so perhaps that has to do with the low battery situation and or a bad battery situation that we identified. I provided my comprehensive report to the buyer, including all of the findings, and I suggested that he may want to request that the dealer put the C6 up on the lift so that they could take photographs and inspect the main harness and the PCM or computer to ensure that it hasn't been damaged in any way by the battery acid. I also suggested that the buyer should have the dealer look into the lazy active handling traction control switch and why the start button had failed to shut off the engine. The buyer read my report and listened to my recommendations, and he still was very interested in pursuing this vehicle, and I believe he had a couple of conversations with the dealer about what items would need to be addressed before he made an offer. However, unfortunately, at the end of the day, they were not able to come to a deal for this 2011 Grand Sport. As it turns out, about a week later, the potential buyer found a similar car in Missouri, and he flew in, inspected the car, purchased it, and drove it home, so now all is well with him. And as of the date of this video, I believe this particular car is still for sale. They lowered the price about $1,000, and I suspect they may continue to do so as we approach winter here in Minnesota. Hopefully you enjoyed the video and it gave you an idea of how I like to tackle a vehicle inspection, and perhaps there are a few things you can use the next time you're in the market for a Corvette. If so, please tap that thumbs up below, subscribe so you don't miss the next video, and most of all, thanks for watching.